everyone. Welcome to our Republican State Legislator Forum. First, I'd like to bring Pastor Mike Munoz up to give the invocation. So if you'd all please stand.
Let's pray. Father in heaven, we just thank you that we can do things like this. We can gather, we can listen to our candidates, we can make decisions. Father, I pray for clarity. I pray for truth. I pray for righteousness. That what we hear tonight will be clear, that we can make decisions. Father, I pray that our country would come back to its roots, that we would once again find our way, that we would recognize there's right and there's wrong, and wrong hurts people. That we would recognize that you are the one that has granted us these freedoms. And if we continue to ignore you, we will lose them. So, Father, restore our country. I pray for all those speaking tonight, and I pray for all those listening tonight. Bless this evening, for we ask all of this in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen.
Now, if you would join me for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please be seated. No, sorry.
Stay standing, please. I'd like to welcome Rebecca Hughesby to sing our national anthem.
Are there any patriots in the house? Then I'm not going to sing this alone, am I?
I hope not.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose dawn strikes and bright stars through the perilous fight, o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets red where the bombs bursting in air gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Good job.
That was awesome. Thank you, Rebecca. Okay, thank you all for coming tonight. My name is Elena Quinn. I'm the president of the Panhandle Republican Women. Our goal is to educate voters, and the way we do that is to get candidates and elected officials in front of you, the public, so that you can make your own decisions. Tonight we're going to have a Republican State Legislator Forum, and you'll be deciding on these candidates in the May 21st primary. We've been collecting questions on our website and through email, and I'll warn you right now, they are great questions. Boundary County came with the hard questions. So good job, y'all.
Reward.
Yes. There's 12 questions and we have 7 candidates. So, it could be a long night. So we've decided that halfway through, we're going to give everybody a 10-minute break to stretch and go to the bathroom and not have your butts going on. So, that being said, I'm going to introduce our moderator, Miss Jeannie Borer, and our vice president and the timekeeper for tonight. our candidates, incumbent Senator Scott Herndon. Running against Scott and Jim Woodward. Incumbent for seat 1A is Mark Sauter. And the first challenger for seat 1A is Jane Sauter, no relation. The second challenger for seat 1A is Spencer Hutchins. For seat 1B, Mr. Cornell Razor. And also for seat 1B is Mr. Chuck Loveman. Okay, at this stage, in order to save as much time as possible, I'm going to ask everyone to please hold your applause. If we have clapping between every question, we're going to have a very, very long night. So please do not clap after this, okay? We have questions with varying response times. One question is 30 seconds. Another question, most of the questions are a minute, and a few are 2 minutes. And if we don't ask a question that you want to have asked, obviously the candidates are right here. So please feel free to come up and ask them. After, yes, of course. Okay, also, there's some additional forums that are going to be put on by other people. We have information at our table. If you'd like to know about those, stop by our table after the forum or during the break. And pick up that information. And at this point, I'm going to hand it over to our moderator and we'll get started. Thank you.
Thanks, Elaine.
Okay, Jim Woodward's going to start with his introduction and just pass the mic down to whoever's close by. And we got 3 minutes each for introductions from each of you, please.
Great, thank you. Thanks to everyone for being out here this evening. I really appreciate it. I'll start with a little bit of housekeeping. I just want to tell you right off the get-go that this over here is the girls' locker room, and that over there is the boys' locker room. Yeah. And it's been that way since I played basketball in this gymnasium about 35 years ago. It's still that way today, and that's the way we want to keep it. So, and speaking of, when we talk about playing ball, if there's going to be a game out here on the court, then I'm going to tell you that if it's the girls' game is planned, then we'll have girls playing on the court. And if it's the boys' game, then we'll be out here for the boys. I want to get that notion taken care of right now. The next thing, I guess, we can talk about, if we get outside the building, we know that just north of us here, about 40 miles or so, we've got a border up there. And there are guards and there are gates, and you have to get permission to come into this country on that border. We have a problem when you go south. We have an open, porous border that's really causing us problems. And you see it in many ways. One of those biggest issues coming out of that is the fentanyl crisis in the country and in our state, which is literally killing us. We've got to deal with that in some way. There was some progress made this year, but we have much more to do. Beyond borders, if we start to talk again about what is typically goes on in the Idaho State Legislature, you have to know I'm a strong supporter of schools. You go out back here behind the school and you look at the brand new gymnasium, the brand new bleachers out there. We came up here and tore down those old bleachers and made room for those new bleachers. Did that as a volunteer project because I went to school here and I'm part of this community. At the same time, go back and look at actions. Actions do speak louder than words. And if you look at my voting record for supporting both schools, the police, our strong borders, any of those things, you can see over a track record that I believe tells you that one, I'm part of the community, and two, that I hold those traditional Idaho values that we all share. Thank you.
We're going my way.
I'm left-handed, it
Goes both ways.
Okay. Good evening. My name is Scott Herndon, and I'm the current state senator for District 1. I'm married to my wife, Arlene. We live down in Bonner County, actually real close to Jim Woodward in Sagal, probably about a mile and a half as the crow flies. I've got 7 children still living at home, ages 10 through 27, and I have told them that they do not have to leave. So, but I'm actually, if you know anybody who's interested in some beautiful girls, my daughters are all unmarried, so you can check them out as the Herndon Girls, very talented musicians. So I ran for the state senate for the first time in 2022. When I ran for the state senate, one of my big motivations coming out of the COVID era is that's where we really got to see where our government was. So we saw, for example, that even in Idaho, Governor Little exercised a lot of executive power, and a lot of new money came into the state of Idaho. So the legislature, let's see if this keeps working. The legislature has, I'm going to turn that on. Try this one. Test 1, 2, test 1, 2. You want me to keep doing that? All right, the legislature is basically all the power for the state is in this room. So the people in the United States have retained their sovereignty. That was the unique design of the system. We didn't want a king, and we didn't want to have a single sovereign over us. We wanted to retain our own sovereignty, and we have granted our sovereignty to the Idaho State Legislature. So the Idaho State Legislature has 2 jobs. It has all of your sovereignty. I represent 53,000 people in North Idaho. The legislature makes the rules for the family of the state of Idaho. And the legislature also spends the collected money for the state of Idaho on the things that we care the most about, where we want to put our shared resources. We saw that get way out of whack. In 2022, I could go without. Tell me if everybody can hear me if I just talk like that. In 2022, Idaho's Republican-dominated legislature, 82% dominated by Republicans, ranked 41st out of 50 states for how conservative the legislature was. And between 2019 and 2022, we grew spending from $9 billion to almost $13 billion. And we were running down the road of running to the left, like the rest of the country. And so what I've worked diligently to do over the last 2 years is to help change the direction of the state of Idaho, and I hope you'll get an opportunity to hear a little bit of what that looks like tonight.
Hi, I'm Mark Sauter. I'm the incumbent for seat A.
I think the mic, if you stand up, the blue one. Yeah, the blue one was better.
Hello? Try that. I'm Mark Sauter. I'm the incumbent for District 1 seat A. I'm a retired fire chief, worked in the fire service for 30 years, then another 3 years in city administration after that. And then since I've been in Idaho, since 2012, I've lived in Sandpoint. I've done a lot of work with the fire districts here, volunteered with the high school, and continue to do that to this day. I've always believed in being a part of your community. I've done my best to be a part of the Sandpoint one. Like I said, when I came up here, I'm from Southern California, came up, I went to Priest Lake first and fell in love with the place. And my guess is if any of you are transplants, you probably did the same thing. Once you get up here, you love it. So it took me a long time to get up here and relocate, but I fell in love with the place and still am. I essentially find myself being a representative for all of you, like I was when I was a fire chief, to try and represent the entire community. Whether it's 2-year-olds or 20-year-olds or 82-year-olds, somehow somebody's got to stand up and say, what's our community need and what's good for our area. So I focused a lot on our healthcare system and our education system. Education is not just K-12, it's our career technical education as well. But to me, those are the two pillars of our area. If we don't have a good healthcare system and a good education system, then it's going to be tough to keep our kids here, tough to raise our families here, and tough to grow up here. So I think those are really important pillars that we need to continue to support. I want to be very careful. I'm very careful with our tax dollars, and I believe I'm very conservative and Republican. However, I also believe that we have to support our communities and our educational systems. So I'm real proud of my voting record, and I'm real proud of what we've accomplished in the last 2 years. So thanks, and we can talk about other things later.
Thank you to the Panhandle Republican Women for hosting this forum. My name is Jane Sauter, and I am running for State Representative, District 1, Seat A. I am not related to the current occupant of that seat. In fact, I am hoping to replace him because I don't believe that he represents liberty-loving constitutional conservatives. My other opponent has a track record of being disruptive in public meetings. I have been married to my husband, Steve, for 37 years. We have 9 children and 14 grandchildren, and we have lived in Idaho for 14 years. I have been involved in Republican politics for 30 plus years, volunteering as a chief election judge, a poll worker, a convention delegate, and a precinct committee person. My top priorities in this campaign are the safety and well-being of the children and families of Idaho, our First and Second Amendment rights, and border security and the current illegal alien crisis. I will fight for Republican values and interests. I will use the Bible, the Republican platform, the Idaho state and U.S. constitutions as my guides. I am not assertive. I am assertive. I'm not aggressive, and I know how to work well with others to get things done. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you all for coming out. I'm Spencer Hutchings. I'm a gun store owner in Sagal and a former Marine. And I am hoping to be your advocate for your rights, for liberty, for freedom, lower taxes, and smaller government down in Boise. Because everybody in here is probably well aware that what we don't need is more taxes and more government. I don't think that's working out for us. I think the government's grown far too large, especially in the state of Idaho. As Scott was saying, if you look at the budgets in the state, they're growing out of control. They're spending our money pretty much like drunken sailors at this point. And no matter how good of a project they want to spend that money on, they're still taking our money and spreading it around to other people, which is just a leftist tactic of wealth redistribution. And if most of the people in this room, I'm assuming, are going to be Republican types, if you think you're for wealth redistribution and you're sitting in a Republican room and you call yourself a Republican, you need to do some introspection, because giving other people's money away is not what being a conservative is about. What we want to do is we want to have you keep as much of your money as possible, have as small a government as possible, and just have that government do the things that it needs to do. Roads, schools to an extent, as long as the schools are functioning. I'm also for parents being able to control the money that is being used in the schools. If your kid is going to a school that's failing, do you want to keep paying for that school? Do you want to keep sending your kid to that school? I don't think a lot of parents do. I think parents would like to have a choice, maybe get a voucher or some kind of system where the parents get that money back and they're able to use it to send their kid to a school that works for them and for their child. Right now we don't have that. There's no competition in the school system. The school system is basically go to the government school or just give us your money and use your own money to fund your own education of your child. And I don't think that's right for the parents. I don't think it works for kids. I know it didn't work for me when I was a young kid. I grew up in California outside Yosemite National Park, and the schools didn't work for me. I was not a very compliant child. I was that 10%. I was the one who always asked the funny questions. I was the kid in Sunday school who asked the guy teaching us why we spent so much money on this beautiful church and couldn't we use that money to help poor people. So I sit in the corner for that one. But I'm here to represent you guys, hopefully to get smaller government, less taxes, and a government that works for you and is truthful. That thing is just really odd. I'd also, I think it's the system, I don't think it's the mic. I'd like to get some more truth in government. I think most of us are sick of being lied to by the government. We want truth from people. I don't want you to ever wonder what I'm going to vote for. You should already know, because I'm going to do what's right for you. I'm going to tell you the truth, whether it's a good truth or an uncomfortable truth. You're going to get the truth, and then we can talk about what we need to do to fix whatever the problem might be. But you're always going to get the truth out of me. Spencer Hutchings, thank you.
I'll use my outdoor voice if that'll work. Okay. I've called the cows home a few times. I'm Cornell Razor. I haven't spent as much time as I wished I had in Boundary County. Now, when I was a kid, I did, but we mostly came up here and hauled hay back to our cattle ranch because you guys have better hay. But don't tell anybody I said that. I grew up in Bonner County. I have a wife that I've been married to, Kim, for 47 years. She just texted me, and she's doing what she normally does when I got involved with politics. She said, "I'm praying for you. Go get them." So here I am. I have 3 kids, and they read the book, so we have 16 grandchildren. All of them grew up around here. My grandson Luke runs the Army surplus store for me. I've been involved in logging and in mill work and in various and sundry other occupations to put money on the table. I know how hard it is to keep money on the table. I know that the state government, as has already been mentioned, has gone from, I remember years when I used to get Ron Crane's CD of the Comprehensive and Annual Financial Review, and we were looking at $900 million to $1 billion to $2 billion. Now it's $13 billion with a B. And so I've always been a fiscal watchdog. When I was a county commissioner, we helped reduce our budgets. I worked at, some of you maybe remember the caribou issue. I'm going to wander around a little bit here so you can take notes and ask me questions about this later. But the caribou issue, we fought that with the Fish and Wildlife, who was going to impose 376,000 acres of no man's land in Bonner and Boundary County. And I was the chair of the county commission at the time. We used an unknown, or a relatively unknown federal procedure called coordination, and we were able to stop the federal encroachment on our lands here and continue to use them. I learned to work with other counties, I learned to work with other commissioners, and I learned to work with people. I keep notes. If you call me, I will write it down, and I will call you back. One of the things I did as a commissioner is I kept a spreadsheet of all the information that I needed when people called, and one of the most often responses I got when I would call them back was silence. "Hello, are you there?" And they'd say, "You called me back." I will call you back. I'm running for seat B in Legislative District 1 and a little bit of civics here. Everybody in here that lives in Boundary County can vote for both legislative seats, A and B. That changed many years ago. So you can do that. You can vote for all your commissioners as well. And I have 30 seconds. I'm going to be done now. But ask the hard questions. I'll answer them. I have contact information there. My website is Cornell for Idaho with 1 L. The university spelled it wrong. It's CORNEL for Idaho.com.
Good evening. My name is Chuck Lohman, and I'm running for the 1B seat as well. I want to thank the Panhandle Republican Women because they had the integrity to invite all the candidates to their forum. So I want to thank you tonight for doing that. I've been all over the world. I've worked in 8 countries with the U.S. military. I've been deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan for 39 months, and I spent 9 months in Korea. As well, I've worked with the Jesus Film Project and Campus Crusade all over West Africa and India. I've seen good governments doing good things, and I've seen horrible governments doing horrible things. That's what drives me to be here tonight. I'm here because I have proven that I am a servant leader. I'm the kind of person who wants to take the time and understand the problem, understand the issues that we have, not just from my own team's perspective, but we need to hear the whole perspective so that we can understand the whole problem. I kind of akin it to a marriage, and we are all, like it or not, married to each other. Right? Have you ever been in a marriage where one person just bullies their way across and just will never listen to you? Some of you saying, I'm still there. That's not a good place to live. But if you've had a spouse who has stopped to listen to your perspective, listen to what you had to say, and then provided their own point of view, and then the two of you come together and make a solution that you two can work together in, that's what provides for a lasting and a strong marriage. And I would pose to you tonight that that's what we need to do for our country, is to put away the media that wants to just bait you in with clicks, right? They want to tell you what you want to hear so that you'll stay tuned in. I encourage you that we need to listen to the whole story. And I've said before, I'm not going to be the kind of politician who just goes with what a caucus or a party tells me how to vote. I'm here to represent you. I'm here to listen to the whole argument and get the whole conversation. And then ultimately, I will stand before my Creator for eternity for my choices. The Idaho Freedom Caucus, the Idaho Republican Party, the Main Street Caucus, they're not going to stand for eternity for how they voted. I am going to stand for eternity for how I voted. And so I promise you tonight, I will listen to the whole conversation. I will listen to you, and I will vote my conscience before the Lord. And for that, I thank you for tonight. I hope we get to know each other. And if you don't get enough, chucklohman.com or my phone number, 208-94. It's on my card. Come get my card.
Moving right along. First question starts with Jim Woodward for 1 minute. And the question is, what is your view on the Constitutional Convention in the current political climate? Go.
I'll take the microphone. I just want to make sure everybody can hear me. I'm supposed to hold up here. I can follow instructions. A constitutional convention in the current climate, I don't know that I'm familiar or comfortable with it. I have had long conversations. There are a couple people that approached me both when I served in the Senate previously, and in the last year or two I've had more conversations with folks, because we do have an active contingent of people around in our area in the state who would like to go forward with a constitutional convention. And so we've had those long conversations. I think that we are at a point in our history right now as a country that we're probably just not quite as stable as we ought to be to go in and try and take our very one founding document and modify it, and not knowing exactly what the ground rules are from that process. I just don't think that's so clearly defined that we just turn everybody loose in a convention and see what comes out. So if there is truly a way to limit it, I fully support term limits, and I fully support a balanced budget amendment for the U.S. government. I think that's, here in Idaho, we balance a budget every year. And Mary says that's it. But we balance a budget every year, and we should move. We have, in fact, one time voted for term limits, and then the legislature turned around and removed those. So I would still support term limits. That was 15 years ago or so.
Thank you.
There we go.
Same question?
Same question. I can repeat it if you need it.
I've got people want an Article 5 convention. Some people want it for 3 reasons. They want to balance the budget, they want term limits on Congress, and they also want to rein in the overreach of the federal government. Give you some reality and some facts. We actually don't balance the budget in Idaho because of our $13.6 billion budget. $1.6 billion of that is national debt. It is nationally debt financed. How do we say no to that? We don't have to wait for the Congress to say no. The Idaho State Legislature can vote no on that federal money right now without having a convention of states. How do we exercise restricting the federal government from having overreach? Well, number one, it's already in the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, and we can basically restrict the federal government from operating outside their lane in the state of Idaho using the sovereignty that the state of Idaho has. How do you impose term limits? On the next election, impose term limits.
Thank you.
I don't support a constitutional convention. I think we have a pretty good constitution as it is. I think from a leadership perspective, we're much better off working out amendments prior to that and then working state by state and getting it where it's a target that we all share long before we walk into a room. I think there's just way too many chances to have it go out of control. And I think I share the interest in term limits and balancing our budget. And I clearly believe that we need to be careful with how we spend our state money. But I don't support a constitutional amendment or constitutional convention. And I do think we need to do some work here and then forward it out to our neighboring states as well. Thank you.
I do not support an Article 5 convention. The same people that call that convention, choose the delegates, and run that convention are the same people who are not following our Constitution now. So to open up our Constitution, I think would be very dangerous.
Try this again. The Constitutional Convention thing is kind of a trap at this point because Idaho's already picked its delegates to go to that. So take a wild guess who's going to be going. It's mostly rhino type people or people that don't really have their interests at heart. So we're already kind of sabotaged from the very beginning. So it's going to be a really bad idea for us to participate in that. I mean, the idea that we're going to fix a bunch of stuff in the Constitution is great, but it isn't going to work out that way, I don't think. I think it's already been completely corrupted. What we need to do, what I need to do as legislator in the state, is put pressure on the governor to exercise his powers, as Scott was saying, where we don't let the feds come in and harm you. We can stop them. We don't work for the federal government. The federal government works for us. And a lot of people have forgotten that. You know, it's not a compact with the government, it's a compact with the states. And they are subservient to us, but we have weak governors and weak legislators that won't do it. We need strong people who are going to push back on that.
At one point, a bill came through Congress that would essentially generate welfare for the cod fisheries of Upper Maine and the New England area. And that bill came through, and the city president at the time, vetoed it, and this airplane will end. He vetoed it, and he explained why he vetoed it, and basically the long dissertation he gave broke down to the federal government has no business being in the business of giving welfare to corporations. Do you know when that happened? It was 1797. That's how long it lasted. We give them one job, and they haven't done it. So giving them the responsibility to play with the document that they're disobeying is a foolish idea. I can't see any good coming from that. So I'm against the Constitutional Convention.
And yes, I am against the Constitutional Convention for many of the same reasons. It's open for too much to change. It would be very hard for us to hold it to, like some have said, just to holding term limits for Congress. Lots of things can happen that would not be beneficial for us as a nation, and so no, I don't support the Constitutional Convention.
If you could give that to Go ahead. House and Senate bill passed this session to allow the state of Idaho to invest in gold and silver, in which Governor Little vetoed this bill. What is your opinion of the state holding gold and silver to hedge against inflation? 1 minute.
Well, I was a co-sponsor of the bill. It was Senate Bill 1314. It passed pretty handily in the Senate. It did not pass handily in the House. Gold and silver in the United States Constitution is real money. It is 100% necessary if you look at how the federal government is managing printed fiat currency. That is why we have inflation. And if you believe the current reported inflation numbers, well, just look around at what things cost today. Gold and silver is 100% necessary to be part of a portfolio for the Idaho State Treasurer as a hedge against risk. And if I had my long-term way, we would have a vault with gold and silver, and we would issue a digital currency in Idaho based on the gold and silver in the vault. The governor opposed it mainly because of politics behind the scenes, and probably because he does not understand the value of gold and silver as a hedge against risk and real money, and we will bring the bill back next year.
I might point that way.
No.
I am in favor of building gold into our portfolio. I'm also interested in gold-backed currency for folks to purchase into personally as a form of currency. And that was passed a number of years ago in Idaho as well. So, yeah. All right, I'm going to pass it on.
When I was a young man, I worked at a gas station in Sandpoint, Rocky, in 76, and I pumped gas, and checked tires, and checked oil, and I put fuel into people's cars, and it cost them 2 dimes for a gallon. If you have the right dimes, it still does. And so I'm a proponent of sound money. I feel that several
I think that's a distraction. I fielded a couple of sound money bills and helped and sent them to the legislature when I was back in the 80s and 90s. We tried to get something generated at the time. And so I like the idea that the legislature tried to get part of the portfolio of the treasurer to be able to invest in sound currency. I would also like to see some legal tender laws passed that remove the capital gains from using gold and silver. I have some ideas about sound money that I think will comport with what Scott and some of those other legislators are looking to do. I think it's a good idea to get our money back based on an actual commodity that's useful rather than paper.
At my store, we actually take the gold-backed currencies. Anybody heard of that stuff, the gold-backs? It's actually got real gold impregnated into a bill note. And I just was looking real quick to see what they're going for now. I haven't looked at it today, but the $5 gold-back when it was made was $5, and right now it's worth $25. And back in the days when they made gold pieces, $20 gold piece, if you took a $20 gold piece to the finest tailor in New York City, you could get the finest suit you could buy. You take that same $20 gold piece to New York City and buy a suit, you can still buy one of the finest suits available because it's still worth what it was back then. It's still $2,300, $2,400 as of today, I think. So having this paper that they're using now that they just keep printing and printing and printing and printing, I don't even know why they bothered the feds. I don't know why they bother to tax us. I mean, they just print it anyways. So I don't know what the point of them even taxing us at this point is. But I really wish Idaho would put some money away in gold and silver. I think it'd be good for the state.
I support back in Idaho finances with gold and silver.
I voted against this bill. The way the bill's written, the gold and silver was to be, the money used for that was supposed to be essentially the state checking account. From the study that I did, putting gold and silver in your checking account when you need to reuse it in a fairly short term is not a good investment. Our state treasurer had issues with this as well. I think that's one of the reasons why the governor vetoed it. The state's done very well with investments, and it's worked out well for our state. We're very secure financially. Another issue is when you buy gold, you have to pay to buy it, pay to store it, and also pay to pick it up and cash it in. So there's a lot of cost to gold, and the financial, bless you, and the statement of purpose didn't mention all the different financial costs to it. So I didn't think it was a responsible, conservative thing to do, to use our checking account for that. Maybe we would use it for some other savings, long term, but not short term. Thank you.
Gold and silver are a great investment, and I believe in a sound currency. I think there are some politics that go along with this bill. So if you take a look at the company that's usually pushing this bill, which is, I think the name of it is an Eagle. It's the Eagle Money Metals Exchange, and they're actually a subsidiary of a company that's back east in South Carolina. So this is just like always, follow the money and you'll see the reason. And so that company sells gold and silver, and they do make significant contributions to legislators in the state of Idaho, and would like to be able to sell that money to the state. So I think that that's really what's driving this. It's again an out-of-state interest with a reason for their motivation on that legislation. But as I said in the beginning, sound currency and gold and silver are fine. Which way are we going with this?
We've seen European governments hurting traditional farming. What would you do to protect Idaho's food security? 2 minutes.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Sure. We've seen European governments hurt traditional farming. What would you do to protect Idaho's food security? 2 minutes.
So I don't know the full nuances of that question, so it deserves a little bit of research. That being said, it's a U.S. Department of State issue as far as who can purchase and sell lands to foreign governments. So it's a little bit beyond the state legislature other than issuing a joint memoriam on the issue. That being said, we do need to be mindful that there are governments who would want to purchase lands and keep them out of production. There are private business entities that are actively doing that to harm our ranching and our farming industries. And so we need to be, one of the things that I would look to supporting is a bill that would make it criminal for an individual organization to purchase up grazing rights and then not use them. They need to use them under the intent that they have been purchased, and we need to enforce that.
A while back, the governor started a program that I actually applauded, and that was he began removing regulations from business. That would be the first step. We need to remove some of the regulations that are hampering business. The second step would be for the state of Idaho to man up and look at its responsibility as an interposition to protect the state itself from onerous government mandates from the federal government. That would free up more capital for our farmers to afford better to do what they're doing, repair their capital equipment, and hire more people. The third thing I would do is I want to look at making it illegal to sell Idaho land to foreign governments. We need to keep our land in our hands, and I'm sure that's already been looked into, but if I get there, I'm going to be pushing it. So those are some of the things that I would do.
So I might have a different perspective on the question than some of these other guys. Does anybody know what's happening in Europe to the farmers? Some of you might know. Has anybody seen the protests? Because they're doing a really good job of keeping it out of the news. I mean, they're really, really trying to make sure you guys don't know what's going on in Europe. The farmers in Europe are being forced to get rid of their crops. They're being forced to get rid of their land. They're being forced to get rid of their cattle. They're being forced to cut their use of chemicals, fertilizer mostly. And the farmers, bless their hearts, are going into these cities where the rules are coming from, going to the capitals, and they're showering the buildings in manure. They're driving their tractors and blocking the roads. And I'm talking hundreds and hundreds of farm tractors going into these city centers and coating the places in manure because they don't approve of it. They're not doing anything violent. They're just showing these people they don't approve of what's being done to them. And I hope that if they try and implement some stuff like that here, I'd love to see us do the same thing. Because when they tell us that, I know you have 100 acres, but you're only allowed to farm 50 of it, I want us to say, no, I'm not going to do that. This is my land and I'm going to farm it. I own it and I'm going to farm it the way I want to farm it. Now, we all have to have some kind of boundaries. You can't farm it with radiation or something, but I mean, within reason, people should be able to farm their land the way they want to farm their land and run their crops the way they want to run their crops. And like Cornell said, we need to keep people that are not citizens from buying our farmland. The Chinese have no business owning our property. None. They shouldn't have it. It should be illegal for them to own our property. Thank you.
My husband and I have been proponents of regenerative and organic farming for many years. We stand by that, and we also, in the Republican platform, one thing I would change is that the federal lands, the lands in Idaho deemed federal, would be returned to Idaho, and that would open up a lot more opportunity for growing possibilities.
Last year we passed, I can't remember the hospital now. Last year we passed legislation to prohibit foreign governments from buying Idaho assets, Idaho property, Idaho water, other Idaho services. So pushed back on that last year, to push back on the Chinese issue and other foreign governments. Idaho is the number one, you could say number 1 or number 50 as far as state regulations go. But we can always do more to try and help out our ag industry with watching our regulations. So I have a good contact with the Ag Bureau and with the Farm Bureau and the ag producers. So we try and stay on top of that. We can also try and help out with our transportation issues for farming. We've done that as far as getting our product moved around. We did some more work this year with the dam system out of Lewiston, so we can continue to do that. I'm sorry.
Okay. The other thing our farms need is they need a consistent supply of workers. We need to work on whatever system we come up with for our government for year-round staffing for our farms. No one wants illegal immigration in our country, but the reality is there's about 35,000 immigrant workers or farm workers in the southern part of our state. We have them here. I think it's the HJ2 workers that are here up in the hop farm. So systems can be worked out, we can get good work, and it'll help our own country and help our own businesses. But we need to continue to push for that. We did it this year with Senate Joint Memorial 2. We did it with some other immigration work. So, but we're gonna have to continue to work on that to make our farm strong.
I see two. Is that going to work? I see two aspects to this, both the foreign ownership and our own growth. Because if you look at, there is a real concern there. Foreign ownership of our lands, our real critical infrastructure in our country. I like to eat. I think we all do, right? And so we have to maintain control of that. But the other piece of this is growth here in the state of Idaho. We have seen in the last 4 years, we've seen a 10% increase in our population here in the state of Idaho. With that comes new roads, new houses. So we have to figure out that balance. The legislature did pass an Agricultural Protection Act bill this year, which I think you'll see implemented by the end of the year. January 1, 2025, the county has to have new policy in place and a new committee to evaluate if someone wants to protect their land as agricultural land. That is the law now. So I support that. I also, I think we have to look at the value here. In Boundary County alone, the grain producers, their total crop volume here is $30 million a year. So you can see that's in Boundary County, a $30 million crop. That's significant. We have to make sure that we're placing that value on that land, and it may require some policy, such as that Agricultural Protection Act. The way we're seeing that play out right now, the other part of it in government policy is highway alignment. And down in Sagal, if you take a look on social media right now, there's quite a conversation going about a proposed alignment through Sagal. Back in 2010, we went through the public process for a decision on how to expand the highway. We're back at it 14 years later. And ITD is reevaluating, and it's going right through some prime farm ground. So that's a policy question. Maybe we need to say we need to keep that highway in the existing corridor.
So when I think of food security, the first thing that comes to my mind is you probably know that a major portion of the U.S. agricultural industry is entirely dependent on subsidies from the federal government. Does everybody know that? Okay, that's not food security.
You cannot be food secure if you're depending on a national government continuing to grow the national debt past $35 trillion to sustain your industry. We are also not food secure when right now in that model system, the Idaho Dairy Association has 70% of their workers in the state of Idaho are illegal immigrants. That is not a sustainable model for agriculture. Now, why are they in that situation? National policy and their own policies. We used to have dairies throughout the state, 200 cow dairies that were profitable, and when you put 10,000 cows out in the middle of nowhere and you need people to take care of them, who's out there to take care of them? So, and they're also making per hundredweight on their milk. Whereas my brother is a local dairy that makes a good profit on a much smaller dairy, and it's an organic farm. That's food secure. And that's something that we need to look at if we want to talk about food security. I'll add one more. I've been getting a lot of geoengineering emails lately. There are DEQ and Idaho Department of Agriculture are involved in rainmaking in the state of Idaho because they want to increase rainfall in the Snake River Aquifer, which is the major ag area in Idaho, and that has harmful effects to human health. That does not help food security, and it doesn't help our security. And yes, we did ban foreign governments from owning agricultural land, and so that was another plus because that's another area of food insecurity.
Before 2008, we had a law where counties could implement a local option tax, oh, this is annoying, to pay for capital expenditures such as jails, water systems, and sewer systems. What is your opinion about bringing the local option tax back? Start with Republican Jane Sauter for 1 minute.
All right, the LOT is available now for resort cities. I believe Bonner's Ferry has it, City of Ponderay, City of Sandpoint. I think it's a good option to look at. It has to be something that voters would approve. It's one way of dealing with the burden of improvements for your community. Sales tax is spread out across the community and not just based on just the property owners. So LOT is an option. It's been a dead option in the House. They've not had much interest in it with our current group, but it's something to look at and evaluate. And since it's sales tax based, many people feel that's a little more fair system since it's across the board and it's not just on the property owners.
I don't have any experience in this particular issue, but I do think that there should be some way. You here need a new jail, and there's been a lot of talk about how to fund that jail. So I do think that this could be something, doing this type of sales tax could be something that could be debated and possibly used.
Well, I guess the real trick is spending the money where the money needs to be spent and not spending the money on things that it doesn't need to be spent on. I mean, isn't that kind of the real trick? I mean, average salary for state employees down in Boise, 100 grand. You know, average income for citizens in state Idaho, 50 grand. So maybe if we weren't paying our state employees so much, maybe we would have a few more bucks we could spend on stuff like that. If it came down to actually having to implement some local temporary tax, I guess if you have to. I mean, I don't think that those tend to be temporary. They tend to, you know, once they get them in there, they tend to never want to take them out. If you could actually enforce it where they raised a certain amount of money and then the tax stopped and everybody was agreeable to it, you know, if it was something everybody voted on, that's a decision the community makes. And who's anybody outside the community to tell them they can't? Thank you.
In the interest of devolving government back towards the local, that's one of the options that we saw used in Sandpoint to refurbish Memorial Field. And it actually was, as near as I could tell, it was appropriately administered. And when it was done, it was done. It ran for 5 years and it stopped. Okay. I know this has been looked into a little bit, but one of the things I want to look into is a more equitable redistribution, I hate the word, but of the money from a community. For example, Ponderay has a Walmart. All that money goes to the state, and they get about this much back. Somehow that just doesn't seem fair to me. So that needs to be looked into as well. The funding formulas probably have been created by people a lot smarter than me, but sometimes that doesn't create equity. So I want to look at that.
So my concern with, and not that a community, I like the points made up here about a community being able to vote for it themselves. But my concern about raising sales tax too high is that it kind of puts a damper on the local economy to be able to sell products. So having multiple avenues to raise taxes is really the best way to go after this. One thing House Bill 521, it's a sales tax increase and a property tax decrease, but most of that money is going to the biggest school districts. It's not going to the school districts that need money to repair and update their schools. And so when we talk about sales taxes, we've got to be able to look at those impacts and diversify how we fuel our government systems.
Okay, thank you all. We're up to question 5. What exceptions?
Jeannie, there's 2 candidates still.
You go ahead. Okay. Hey, I believe in local control, and that's what this discussion is about. But there's a balance too, because when you start to put sales tax in one place and not another, then you start to see people move around. It really changes. So if there's right now, the one local option tax that we have in Idaho is Resort City. Bonners Ferry does now qualify, so does Ponderay and Sandpoint. The big cities don't. Kootenai does, Coeur d'Alene, so on. But if there's an extra 1 or 2 cents in Ponderay and then not in Sagal, how does that affect the car dealerships? That puts them on an uneven basis, right? And so that's what you're trying to get at. I can tell you the politics too, that there will be no local option taxes in Idaho as long as the current Speaker of the House is in office. And I say that, Mike Moyle, I get along fine with him, but he is not going to allow that to happen as long as he's there. He's been there 26 years. So you're not voting on him, but he's an example of term limits. I'd still say that to his face too. But those are some of the balances to make on local, but the principle at its heart is, yes, keep the decisions as close to home as possible.
I don't disagree with keeping decisions close to home, but when we're talking about a local option tax, how many people, when you think about sales tax, property tax, and income tax, and other taxes, think that, gee, maybe I'm already paying enough tax total? So when we're talking about another local option tax, we're talking about an additional tax. Every time we start a tax, first tax in the territory of Idaho back in the 1860s was property tax. Then we added income tax, then we added sales tax. And every time we talk about adding a tax, we're going to spend it on a new thing. But if you add up the total, $3 billion of sales taxes right now is how much goes to the state, and it gets diverted to 180 boards, agencies, and commissions, some of which should not exist, which is why I vote no on some budgets. And there are things in those budgets that we should not spend. And if we actually had done that last year, you could have practically eliminated all property tax with the surplus that we faced last year in 2023. But the condition of the legislature tends to be spend, 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 and honestly rubber stamping budgets that the agencies bring them.
What exceptions do you support regarding abortion? Do you agree that doctors should be criminally liable? Start with Jane Sauter for 2 minutes.
Well, it's my personal belief that a baby is a baby is a baby, and if they're alive and someone's going to take that baby's life, then that's just not right. So I would say no exceptions, and even the exception of the health of the mother, you have to really be careful with, because sometimes they'll just say it's the health of the mother. If they can save both of them, wonderful. But there's always been cases where one or the other is going to pass away and in a really serious situation. But as far as the other exceptions, I am not in favor of any other exceptions. And I do believe that a doctor that would take the life of a baby just to take the life of a baby should be charged criminally.
The left did a pretty good job of influence a lot of people in the last 40, 50 years to try and convince them abortion was okay, didn't they? I mean, they really did a good job on some of the kids. I was counter-protesting the pro-Planned Parenthood people in Sandpoint one time, and it was scary to me. It was scary to me watching these young kids come out, and they were, 12, 13-year-old kids wearing Planned Parenthood stuff. And the only thing that I didn't want to, they tend to say you're harassing the people if you talk to them and stuff. The only thing I said to them was, do you know who Margaret Sanger is? And that's all I'd say, go look up Margaret Sanger. And that's the only thing I'd say to the young kids. Please go look up Margaret Sanger for me, please. So I'm not for abortion. I don't think that doctors who perform those procedures are the greatest people in the world. I think maybe they might want to go to a different state. If they're doing that in this state, they should be criminally prosecuted. I feel the same way for the ones that are mutilating the kids. They should be criminally prosecuted too. Thank you.
Our worldview and our logic should track all the way through. And if it is a baby from the beginning, and I'm sure most of the people here believe that, if it's a baby from the beginning and it's a life all the way to its natural death, it needs to be protected at every stage. So I don't believe in any exceptions. Regarding the life of the mother, that is the most egregious one that is always blown out of proportion. It happens very rarely, like under 100 times a year in most cases, in most years. So you never use exceptions, or exceptions to the rule make bad law. At any rate, if the doctor is actually murdering a child, do we believe that? And if we believe that, then we need to consider that there should be criminal penalties attached. It's just hard to say any more than that. It's as Spencer pointed out, we've been sold the bill of goods for many, many years, and the worldview has been that everybody gets to make their own decision. Not with life. If we don't get life right, we don't get anything else right.
So I am 100% against 93% of the abortions that occur in the U.S., which is for elective reasons. I'm against abortion for the sake of killing a child with a trisomy condition, just because it may be an inconvenience to the parent. I do recognize that sometimes things can go horribly wrong. And at those points, people need to be able to make decisions very quickly to save the life of the mother. One of the things that I propose is, just as we would require a police officer to come search your property, to pass certain legal tests and then get a warrant from a disinterested magistrate. In the same way, for these extreme cases for abortion, we want oversight. So that, as Jane pointed out, that they're just not going to say that it's for the life of the mother just to do it, right? We want a disinterested magistrate plugged in through the entire course, because when pregnancy goes wrong, it goes wrong very quickly. And we need good people in there making the right decision at the right time. And so I have been in the hospital talking with doctors about options. I've been there to advocate for life. And sometimes there's just no good decision to be made. That's a hard place to be. And so I would encourage you, we need to find good ways that we can all agree on to make sure that the life of the mother is preserved while still protecting the most precious life that we have, which is the life of the child.
So in 1863, Idaho became a territory by proclamation of a document Abraham Lincoln signed. And in 1864, the Idaho Territorial Legislature implemented their first set of laws, the territorial laws, in which abortion was a criminal act, 2 to 5 years punishable in prison, with no exceptions, and that was the law in Idaho all the way until 1973. So the argument, and that is the law that is in place today in Idaho. The same law that was in place for 110 years. The reason that law worked, and it works today, is because all human life is valuable. It's made in the image of God, and we should not ever intentionally kill a child based on its age, size, location, or inability to protect itself. Now, none of the hospitals in Idaho, even though they're making an argument in Bonner County, they tell me they are 100% in compliance with Idaho's abortion reporting law. In other words, they report it to the Department of Health and Welfare if they need to perform an abortion for some medical emergency to avert the death of a mother. Guess how many abortions the hospitals in the entire north part of Idaho have reported in the last 20 years? Zero. They don't need to perform abortion to save the life of a mother, because you don't need to intentionally kill the unborn child to save the life of a mother. You treat the unborn child as a patient and the mother as a patient, and you're allowed to triage your patients. If you only have the technology to save one, then you can prioritize the mother. It works in Idaho. It's worked for 110 years, but it has become politicized by the left, by those who brought us Roe v. Wade, who wanted abortion on demand. And that's the only thing that's in question. I do support the law we have in Idaho right now.
I don't believe in abortion as birth control. I don't believe, actually, I voted on those laws that are in place right now. When I was in the state senate in 2021, 2022, the laws that are currently in place, I voted in support of those, and those laws passed. Now, Roe v. Wade was overturned, and the reality of those laws has struck home that we have a problem here. In the last 2 years, we have lost 22% of our obstetricians here in the state of Idaho, or the OBGYNs. We don't deliver babies in Bonner or Boundary County. How do you have a community if you don't deliver babies? So I believe that life starts at conception. I just can't find any finite point where you can say that if the cells are reproducing, that there's not life there. But we have to go back and revisit this and say, how do we not hurt ourselves? How do we not hurt the women who are having babies in the state of Idaho? Because right now that's what's going on. The term abortion applies whether a fetus is alive or passed. And so a woman loses a child and a doctor can't take care of that, can't go to the hospital and deal with that. I understand that the body will naturally do that, but sometimes doesn't work out, and a woman might get sepsis. And the current law says that woman has sepsis. She has a health condition, not a life condition. And so you wait to treat. And the doctor calls the attorney and tries to figure out, can we or can we not help this woman? And then when the woman is dying from sepsis, then the doctor can act. I don't think that's right. We need to revisit this, but I certainly do not believe in abortion.
I don't believe in abortion either, especially for birth control. I support what we have on the books today. However, what we're short is some type of a women's health exception. What's that? When there's a problem with a pregnancy, I don't believe that the legislature should have a voice in long-term health implications for a mother. If it's a first-time pregnancy, I think the family ought to have something to say about long-term reproduction. Does that ruin that woman's childbearing for the rest of her life, for the 25-year-old woman that gets pregnant while she's married in a planned pregnancy? I think we've got to have something to say about that situation. It doesn't happen very often, but it happens enough that it's driving away our doctors and a lot of our healthcare officials in our state. I can tell you from an EMS perspective, when we have to drive an hour and a half or 2 hours to get to a hospital with a patient in an ambulance, that doesn't work. It's not good for the patient. It takes all your resources away as well. So I think we have to figure out what we can do with a women's health exception, keeping in mind that exactly where we are in our state as far as all of our abortion regulations and our strong belief in being pro-life. But pro-life also means that we can take care of the health of the mother, especially for her reproduction further on in her life. So it also has something to do with keeping our kids here. If we don't provide good health care for our kids that are growing up and our other future generations, then we're just not going to keep our own kids here. So I think two things: stability for our community is health care and education, and I think we do need to do some work on our abortion situation. Thank you.
The federal government is responsible for the ongoing tide of illegal immigration at our southern border. However, states can still create laws that make their state more or less attractive destination. What specific legislation will you introduce in 2025 to make Idaho a less welcoming destination for illegal immigrants and so-called migrants to live or work? Start with Spencer Hushkins for 2 minutes.
Well, this kind of goes back to what I was saying before about this. The federal government works for us. We don't work for them. You know, the state of Idaho is in charge of their relationship with the federal government. So when the federal government does things like take people off the southern border and just dump them all over the country and just flood different places, and if you look at the stats, a lot of the places that they're dumping these people are red districts for some reason. They're taking a lot of these people from the southern border and dumping them in red areas. I think they're doing it to dilute the voting population on purpose. What we can do, I'd like to see the Idaho State Police and the local law enforcement be able to send these people someplace else, either out of the state or back to where they came from. Currently, they don't allow us to do that. You know, we're not allowed to do border enforcement stuff, and we're not allowed to take these people out, but it'd be nice if we could. If we had a governor that had a spine, I'm sure we could just stand up to the federal government and say, we're not taking these people, you sent these people to us, they're not allowed to be here, out they go. And I don't know, send them to Washington, send them back to Arizona or Texas, wherever they came from. But we don't need to accept these people here, and I would strongly suggest that we try and keep them out. You know, we have kids leaving the area because they can't find jobs. Well, maybe some of these kids would be working these jobs that these illegal people are coming here to work. I mean, if the barley place couldn't get any illegal workers, would they hire local kids, even if they had to pay them a little bit more? I think they might. I think they would. I mean, they're going to have to get their crops picked somehow, and if, you know, the students want to go do that, why couldn't they? You know, so what if they have to pay them a few extra bucks and, you know, they have to buy a slightly smaller yacht this year? Who cares? You know, let the kids make a few bucks, let them get some work ethic, and keep the illegals out of the state. Thank you.
So I believe there was a statute or an attempt for legislation that would remove welfare benefits from illegals. I would pursue that. Also, driver's license laws. They should not be allowed to have driver's license. And as I mentioned earlier, continue the work, the long-term work of reducing the onerous regulations at both the federal and state level that hamper productivity of business so that they can afford to pay more. But those are long-term. Short-term would be deny welfare benefits and controlling our driver's licenses. The third thing would be something I heard from a family from Nebraska yesterday. There was an idea that I'd never heard of. Apparently in Oklahoma, they are imposing what are called a remittance penance or a remittance fee. Many illegals will send their money home with in money orders or in some such like that. And we would simply require, and I'd have to think this through and do a little more research on it, but this just came to me yesterday. And the idea was that they would pay a tax or a fee for that remittance. What you're doing is you're using the carrot and the stick. The carrot is to benefit the regulation or benefit the corporation so that they can afford to pay more. The stick is to make it more difficult for illegals to do business here. What don't we understand about the word illegal?
Right, right.
I mean, I read 3 different dictionaries and they all said essentially the same thing. Not Google's dictionary, mind you, but the real ones. So, you know, I'm just trying to understand this. I'm a grammar Nazi, but illegal means illegal.
Yeah.
It means not legal, right? Okay, I just want to make sure I had that right.
So I have a couple thoughts on illegal immigration. My family immigrated here in 1918 and settled a farm in eastern Colorado. We are a nation of immigrants, and for those people who want to come to our nation and work hard and make a living and be contributors to our nation, we need to have pathways for them to do it rightly. So if there are farms who need to rely on these workers, we need to provide pathways for them to do it legally. Now, if they're here illegally, if they're criminals doing criminal actions, the best thing that we can do is lay on our POTUS and make sure that they make asylum seekers claim it in the country adjacent to the country that they're fleeing. That was the best solution that we had, and we just need to get our Congress to implement that yet again. But we need to make pathways for legitimate workers who are providing a legitimate service to our country to make it so that they're here paying taxes for the services that they're taking advantage of as well. Their kids are in our schools. They're taking advantage of our healthcare services. We need to make sure that they're paying their part in that as well. But we do that by providing legitimate pathways for people who want to come to our country for legitimate reasons.
So at the Idaho State Capitol, while you guys are all working every day, there's a bunch of people that wear green badges and they're lobbyists. They work for law firms, but there's also some that just work in industry. And last year, Bob Nairbaut, the head of the Idaho Dairymen's Association, took me to lunch, and we were crossing the street from the Capitol, and he said, Scott, 70% of our workers are illegal immigrants. We need to make it easier for them to stay in the state of Idaho. So he wanted to run a petition last year with Senate Joint Memorial 101, and it contained amnesty, and that only came after he tried Senate Bill 1081 last year to give driver's licenses to illegal immigrants. And he gave me this great story, but I told him, Bob, that's the one responsibility the federal government has. We do not want to take away their responsibility. This year I co-sponsored House Joint Memorial 8, which called for the impeachment of Joe Biden for failing to secure the southern border. I voted against that amnesty bill last year, Senate Joint Memorial 101. They brought it back this year, Senate Joint Memorial 102, and it wasn't, they specifically said it doesn't have amnesty. But it still contained a provision I question. Is the purpose of immigration policy to provide workers for jobs in Idaho? See, they want to do that because we have a demographic problem because we're not actually reproducing ourselves enough. But you can make up for that with technology. You have to have 2.1 kids per family, and we're way below that in the state of Idaho. So we ran a bill this year to take away public welfare benefits from illegal immigrants. The House Business Committee killed it. I co-sponsored House Bill 615. I ran a bill to make it impossible for illegal immigrants to have driver's licenses. Senate Bill 1216, it passed. We had a bill, House Bill 464, that the Idaho Freedom Caucus got through the House, but it was killed by Senator Jim Guthrie in the State Affairs Committee in the Senate because he's the guy that ran the driver's license bill for illegal immigrants, and ours was an interstate compact that would allow the governor to send resources to secure the southern border if the federal government's not going to do it. Those are the directions I would head.
Well, I'm not sure it requires legislation. I think we just have to get together and elect a Republican president. And we might be able to take care of this. So, but what would I do if down in the legislature and we need to come up with a solution? Well, I think that first step is just those memorials that you hear of. The legislature can speak as a unified voice and tell our federal delegation the importance of this to Idaho and to the country. And so we have 2 U.S. senators and we have 2 U.S. representatives, And we need to, and people across the country, all these different states, we all need to be there telling our federal delegation that this needs to be dealt with at the federal level. So what do we do in the state then? Well, we do have that, the big topic has been for a number of years now, those illegal workers in the dairy industry. And about 3 years ago, a similar memorial was put in front of me. That memorial said, we have a problem, especially, and I recognize it as a problem because those people are here, they're driving, they're hitting other Idahoans, and when the accident scene clears, then they drive away, and that Idahoan is left with that damage, whether that was a $5,000 or $10,000 accident. So I said, yeah, this resolution says, this memorial says, hey, we got a problem, we need to fix it, let's form a committee and figure out how to do it within the bounds of our Constitution. So I voted for that a few years ago. Of course, that didn't play very well with some people, or one in particular. And so you've seen a lot of flyers come out with pictures of me with my Joe Biden mask and I love illegals. Not the truth. I spent 21 years in the Navy. I've served you out there on a nuclear-powered submarine with nuclear weapons. I've spent my time underwater doing the work for you. I believe in our country. I believe in our institutions. That's why my default answer is we need to make the federal government fix it. That's my answer.
I believe in incentives, whether they're positive or negative. Done right, they work. I think we need to continue to do things that make our state less interesting to people that want to immigrate here illegally. Whether it's driver's licenses, I think this year we passed a bill that said absolutely those that are here illegally can't vote. Crazy as it may sound, we still passed a bill to reinforce that. We passed a bill about fentanyl and human trafficking at the border. Another incentive to not have people come to Idaho because of mandatory minimums. Another thing we did was we sent ISP down to the border for some different training missions. Did it stop our illegal immigration to our state? No, probably not. Probably didn't do a lot that way, but it sure trained them up so they can figure out how people are doing human trafficking and getting them into our state, how they're migrating into our area, so they can come back and let other law enforcement officers know this is the way this is the path for the illegal immigration system into our state. Last thing we did is towards the end of our session, we passed a bill, House Bill 573, and that actually allowed law enforcement to stop with probable cause and with all due respect for everybody's constitutional rights, but to ask people for ID, especially if they're involved in a traffic accident, confront them. Ultimately, they would criminalize it and go before a magistrate justice, get them, convict them potentially, and then they would be essentially escorted out of our state. We got it through the House. We didn't get it to the Senate. Whether that was a timing issue or not, I'm not sure. But we passed 573, and I think that'll help too in making our state less interesting to illegal immigrants. Thank you.
I think that Americans are basically kind and generous and humanitarian people. And I think the correct pathway is to turn them back around and have them come in the legal way. And that's just the bottom line. So if I were to do something legislatively, it would be to go back at that, take away the welfare, take away everything. And of course, we keep the emergency medical services because, why? Because we're Americans and we care about people. But we also care about our own sovereignty. And if we don't do something and do something pretty quickly, we're gonna lose our sovereignty as a state and as a nation. So I would do whatever I could to turn them back around and send them back home. And especially not just the criminal element, but all of them. They've all broken the law. And here we are, law-abiding citizens, but we're just watching this invasion and our hands are just tied. So it is a federal problem, but it is also a state problem, and I would work as hard as I could to stop this flow.
Starting with Cornell, several states are considering legislation to ban central bank digital currency, otherwise known as CBDCs. And 2 states have passed laws to the effect. Would you support such a ban in Idaho? Why or why not? Go for it, Cornell.
So I would need to look at the legislation to ban central bank digital currency. I am not a fan of central banks at all. I'm a fan of local banks. The founding fathers intended for the 371.25 grain silver dollar at the time to be issued into production, issued into spending. And it was that was what protected us from not having the right amount of money behind the goods that were circulating in the country at the time. That's kind of a reduced economic lesson, 30 seconds already. So I would be very helpful at looking at something that would stop central banks from issuing a digital currency. I think it needs to be individuals and locals who issue their own digital currencies.
I'm not going to belabor a lot. I haven't researched the issue of digital currencies that much, though I do favor the ability for those folks to keep it at their level. And if that's something you're investing your money in, then I don't see government oversight as being something that should regulate that.
So we have a central bank digital currency. It's the US dollar. How many of your transactions do you use a physical dollar? It's digits on your screen. That is a digital currency managed by the central bank. Now, I ran a bill this year. We actually had a bill in the House that failed on the House floor, House Bill 585, that would have banned a CBDC, an actual digital currency, even though I would argue the dollar is. And I ran a parallel version in the Senate, but I actually think the way you defeat a central bank when you're talking digital currency is through free market capitalism. Have a better currency. And there are a lot of them in the free market. And so Florida passed a bill that's an anti-CBDC, and notice the federal government didn't freak out. And why? Because they know that Florida's is not going to stop what the central bank is actually planning to do. So my bill in the Senate, Senate Bill 1296, is the model going forward. It's called Distributed Ledger Technology and protections for that allows for private digital currencies.
I think the bigger threat to your day-to-day life from cryptocurrency or digital currency is probably the way that it is produced. The Bitcoin mining you've heard of and the energy required for that. We spent a few decades trying to learn how to conserve energy. Technology helps us conserve energy in many ways, LEDs instead of an old style light bulb. But now, if you look at our energy consumption in the United States, in Idaho, we're going to run out of the ability to keep up with the demand for electrical energy in the United States. That's because we all have phones, we all have computers, all those different things add to the load. I'll give you the example. Most of us here are on the Northern Lights electrical co-op system, and in the last decade, the peak load on that system has doubled. We haven't doubled in population, but we have doubled the load on that system. So I think that the greater threat here is the amount of energy that's being used in that cryptocurrency mining.
I think the cryptocurrency for our state, I think the best way to go would be to study it and see what other states have done that work, and actually take advantage of states being laboratories of experimentation, and we can learn from them rather than make the mistakes on our own. Similar issue was with the Bitcoin mining, that we had a bill in the House that we ultimately voted down. That was a heavy industrial type electrical use system, and what we found was a number of the companies that wanted to do this Bitcoin mining in our state were actually just shopping to get the best rates so they could build a system, take advantage of low electricity rates, and then move on. So I think we have to be really careful with this type of thing. It's easier to learn from others before we get too deep into this and lose our own state control. Thank you.
I'm not in favor of central bank digital currency. I think it's another way for the government to just be able to look into your accounts. They already can anyway, but to actually make it to be central bank, I think would be a big mistake, and I would vote against that.
So just so everybody's clear, cryptocurrency and central bank digital currency are two completely different things, okay? Cryptocurrency is a completely different thing from central bank digital currency. Cryptocurrency, you can basically control yourself for the most part. I mean, the government gets its hands into everything, but you can, for the most part, control it. The central bank digital currency, what that is Bob's spending too much money on electricity this month. Hey, Bob, we just turned your account off so you can't buy any more electricity this month, or food, or gas, or whatever they want to do. So that's what the central bank digital currency is. It's them being able to shut your money off when they feel like it, and I'm totally against it if you can't tell.
Be still, my heart. Would you sponsor an initiative to regain control of federally occupied state lands? Chuck, 1 minute.
It was devised to stand in front of the cameras. So.
But is it your good side?
Does my minute start now? So, my view of the federally occupied state lands is, I don't think our Idaho Department of Lands does a spectacular job of maintaining access to our state lands. And if our federal lands get reverted to state control, we will see more restricted access. And if those lands are then sold off to private entities, we will see even more restricted access to lands that we want to access. What we need to do is move back to a multi-use land ethic where we can access our lands for logging, for ranching, for agriculture, for recreation, to balance all of those uses so that folks here in North Idaho can make a living from the land that we have access to. Thank you.
So what's interesting is I think when we talk about federally managed lands, you all know the real problem there is that the federal government doesn't manage those lands. But let's go back to the United States Constitution. I still, to this day, am perplexed how it is that in the United States Constitution, it does not allow the federal government to lay claim to Idaho public lands, yet here we are at 63% of Idaho claimed by the federal government. And if you go to Custer County, it's something like 98% of the county is claimed by the federal government. The solution has been discussed for 50 years. This goes way back to the 1970s, the American Land Council, and way back before then, and no progress has been made. And I think where the progress is going to have to start is, frankly, from everybody in the communities. You're going to have to put pressure on the legislature, because it's not enough for one person to sponsor something down there unless people are demanding a change. And that's going to have to come from regular people living in the communities in Idaho.
I think that the premise of the question is a little bit off. So yes, we need to manage our federal grounds better. This question has been floating for some time. I went to the title company and I looked at the ownership of those federal lands. And those federal lands have never been owned by the state of Idaho. The state of Idaho was granted a charter by the United States government, and we were given a certain amount of land that was private. About 4 million acres went to the school endowment fund, and then those other lands were reserved as federal grounds. So to say that we need to take them back, doesn't work. But yes, we certainly need to manage them better. And that goes right back to making our federal government work better. We're better at the state level. That's the same thing, that it's local control versus a decision made far away from home. We still have that problem. If you take a look at the federal government, there wasn't a dust bowl until the dust hit the East Coast, and there wasn't a problem with fires out here until the smoke made it to Washington, D.C.
2 years ago, I studied this. I'm a family forester, so I tried to look into all the forestry part of it. The fact is, the federal government owns quite a bit of ground. A lot of it's not really very productive, not like the IDL ground, let's say between Priest River and Priest Lake. That's some pretty productive timber ground. Our state endowment really benefits from that, and our educational system does as well. When I talked to IDL about it and tried to do some good solid research, the reality is they're not paid as well as Forest Service, and they're not in a position to take over that land. So before we run an initiative, I think we ought to be prepared to land that fish that we think we're going to catch. I think if you talk to our sportsmen, they're not real wild about us taking over ground and then potentially selling it off, because after all, most everybody here loves the outdoors. So I'd be real careful, and I'd be real hesitant to run an initiative to do that. Thank you.
I think that there needs to be the proper infrastructure to turn any land back over to the state of Idaho. But I do believe that even in the Republican platform, I would reword the section about this subject to say that the lands, the state lands that are deemed federal right now, would be turned back over to the state, whether you want to call it control, ownership, whatever you want to call it. And if the infrastructure was in place, we could actually operate in the black, and instead of taking federal fiat money, we could actually not be in the red, we could be in the black. And that's with careful planning, not getting rid, the fishermen and all of them, they're not going to be upset. 62% of Idaho, that doesn't take, we wouldn't have to sell off all of that, just part of it to become solvent and be able to stay in the black.
So the thought that the land maybe isn't as good as what it could be, I can't imagine any place in Idaho that's worse than some of the places in Arizona and Texas that I've seen. I mean, every bit of our state is better than that. And having said that, I want every single bit of it back, and I want us to own it. In New York, the federal government owns less than 0.5% of their territory. They own 32 million acres. I think Scott said 63. It's between 61.6 and 63, depending on where you read it. Why do they get to treat us differently than they treat New York? Is New York better than us? Do they get to keep all their land? Are they more important than us? No, it is our land. It is within the borders of our state. And if the title company needs to change the ownership of the land, then maybe we should motivate the government to give the land back to us. And as Scott said also, it is going to take a groundswell of support. We don't need to make it illegal or pass a law to have the federal government not be allowed to have the land. What we need to do is make the federal government understand that it is unthinkable to the citizens of Idaho that you are taking our land from us and keeping it from us. If we had that land, we probably would never have to pay property taxes again, okay? Just that one thing. There's other ways to get rid of property taxes, but just that one thing, getting our land back, would fix that.
How much time do we have on this one?
1 minute.
Oh, my word. Article 21, Section 18 of the Idaho Constitution says, and the people of the state of Idaho do agree and declare that we forever disclaim, all right and title to the unappropriated public lands lying within the boundaries thereof, and to all lands lying within said limits owned or held by Indians or Indian tribes, and until, now pay attention to this, and until the title thereto shall have been extinguished. What does it mean to extinguish title, realtors? You lose control, you cede control of something. Every state to become every territory to become a state had to have an enabling act or a constitutional provision that allowed the federal government to take the time they needed to extinguish the title on the lands within that territory once it was going to be declared a state. They're violating the state constitution. They're violating the Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17, Section 8, Clause 17 of the federal constitution. And what the big boogeyman is, we wouldn't be able to manage it. Hello, they're not managing it. Anything that comes back to the state, the infrastructure would be set up and created. Once we had those lands to actually use, the housing problems that we have in our counties would pretty much cease to exist. But we don't have to, as Jane said, we don't have to sell it. We can extract royalties from people that mine it and log it. We could get rid of the property tax. I do a presentation. Do you know how much you make on your acres of federal land in Boundary County? Take a guess what the federal government magnanimously pays you. $2.38 an acre. I'll leave you with that.
Idaho law has no oversight for geoengineering/chemtrailing over Idaho skies. Yet Tennessee just passed a law prohibiting geoengineering, chemtrailing over their state. What is your stance on geoengineering for the state of Idaho? Start with Republican Mark Sauter for 2 minutes.
Well, I won't take 2 minutes. I too can see the chemtrails across the skies. I think it'd be a great thing to study. I honestly don't know that much about the chemtrail situation, and I'm not familiar with the Tennessee bill. I'd fall back to what I usually do, which is read the bill, do the research, talk to the right people about it, and try and come up with a better solution for our state. But that's the best answer I can give you for geo.
Good one, short.
Similar to Mark, I don't really have a lot of knowledge about this, but I do notice that when I go to other states, it's not nearly as bad as it is in Idaho. So I don't know why, and I don't know who, but I do know that whatever they're putting in the sky, I would like to know what it is, and I'd like to know if it's good for us, and if it's just for their weather patterns and for rain and all of that. It would just be good if they would let the people who live here know what it is. And I would be against it if there was something that I had to be against it for.
So I used to fly on planes quite a bit, and when you fly at certain altitudes, there's these things called contrails. You know, it's water vapor. And as far as I know, most of this chemtrail stuff, or at least the tinfoil hat stuff, you know all the conspiracy theories that we all had that all came true? Yeah, maybe this is one of those too. I'm not sure about it. But if it turns out to be true, if I find out that there are people that have been putting chemicals in the sky and raining them down upon us, I think the people should be found, and I think they should be tried, and whatever damage they've done to us, the punishment should be commensurate with that. If they're polluting us in some way, if they're raining chemicals down upon us, I have no sympathy, no mercy for what happens to these people if they've done this without our knowledge. Thank you.
So look at model legislation in Tennessee, research it, talk to the people who have been watchdogging this for decades. I know many of them, and proceed with some some legislation for the state of Idaho, and build an aerial wall that keeps that stuff out. If it is indeed as bad as it is, and I believe it is, I think as Spencer says, it's another one of those tinfoil hat theorems that you're going to be taking your tinfoil hat off because it's true.
I grew up in northern Nevada where they did cloud seeding in the 90s, and it was an experiment to help with our desert areas to get more rainfall. And so it's as simple as just putting a particle in the sky to allow water to condense against it and then fall down as rain. Now, there may be chemicals, and like everyone has said, we need to research that and to see what those chemicals are. So again, more research needs to be had to see if this is actually the threat that we're concerned about. It is interesting to be able to use the tools of nature to cause rain to fall on our crops.
Probably be relatively short. I told you they are doing cloud seeding in Idaho, and that would be the state of Idaho is doing that, and their goal is to increase the condensation in the rainfall for the Snake River Plain for agriculture. So that's what's been going on in Idaho for a long time. Interestingly, this subject we started getting emails in our Senate and House accounts within the last 3 weeks. And all of a sudden, you can tell when some hot subject is around because you'll get a flood of emails. And the way I usually respond to that is I always start out doing research, and I usually start out not trusting everybody. It's usually a good starting point. So, meaning not trusting the people giving me information, but the chemical companies or agrochemical companies or big business, because this year, for example, we really went up against Bayer at the State House over their agrochemical business. And they're usually not looking out for regular Idahoans. That's the bottom line. We had to fight Bayer off on a bill that was going to protect their corporate interests this year. We killed their bill by 2 votes on the Senate floor, and then they kept coming back after it all the way until we adjourned for the year. And they'll be back next year. So that tells me that I know Bayer has their corporate interests but doesn't have their personal interests. So I start out with the assumption that we're going to have to find a solution, and that's one of the parts of the job. Is I've been presented with some draft legislation, and then we are going to have to build consent for that draft legislation, which means work this summer to build consensus down at the State House, and we'll probably be battling some major corporations and lobbyists, and it'll be very hard work to get done.
I heard a lot of theys. I'm not sure who they is. Yeah, I guess you have to ask the question, do you believe that someone is intentionally trying to do you harm? Yes. Okay. So, I guess I can talk a little bit about what I saw there when we talk about the Bayer this year. If you go and talk to your farmers right here in the county that farm these tens of thousands of acres, they're talking about a package of fertilizer and it has a warning label on it. And is that warning label sufficient? Should you be able to sue them? To me, it came across as, if you remember, McDonald's being sued for hot coffee because it was hot. And I think that's my perspective on this Bayer bit, that the trial lawyers loved to make money because the trial lawyers make just as much money as the plaintiff on any kind of situation. And so that's what I see if we're talking about chemicals and corporations. I have had a top secret clearance in the United States military. I told you that. I used to hold the keys to your nuclear weapons. I have never seen anything. I know that the people I worked with in your Department of Defense and the Navy were people like you and me, going and taking their turn protecting our country. So I'm not sure that I'm ready to assume that someone is out there intentionally trying to spray something down on us. The cloud seeding, the chemistry of that is that you take silver iodide, and when you bring silver iodide up, it changes the ability for the water molecule to precipitate out and go from gaseous phase to liquid phase. When it goes to liquid phase, it drops to the earth either as water droplet, or can also be snow if it's colder out. So there's some science there. I do know we are cloud seeding, but I don't know about the rest.
Well, what is your view on ranked choice voting, aka open primaries? Open primary initiative. Start with Senator Scott Herndon for 30 seconds.
100% opposed. Just ask Alaskans how well it's worked out for them. So Alaskans will have a ballot initiative on their ballot in November to undo ranked choice voting. And some of the blue cities where they've implemented ranked choice voting, even the Democrats don't like it. So in Alaska, this is the initiative that the Democrats are hiding by calling open primaries initiative. It's not technically even an open primaries initiative. It's a top 4 primaries initiative, not an open primary, and I can just explain the difference. But the bottom line is we need to defeat the ranked choice voting initiative on the November ballot, or Idaho will drift way to center left or worse.
I'd like to go back to the system that I grew up with. We've only had the closed primary that we have right now for the last 10 years. I grew up here in Idaho. We always were able to go and vote. And the reason I say that, out of our 1 million registered voters here in the state of Idaho, 275,000 are unaffiliated. You oftentimes say an unaffiliated is an independent, and I say that starts with an I, just like Idaho. Idahoans are independent. We want to make our choices based on the people. So I would prefer to shift back to what we had done for the decades that I grew up here.
Last year, the House voted against ranked choice voting. It was a pretty heavy majority that voted against it. That said, I personally think the initiative process, it's in our Constitution, and I think if they get the signatures and they want to run it, then we can vote it down. But I strongly believe that we ought to stick with our own Constitution and not try and put our thumb on the scale and change anything. So you can get the signatures, just like any other initiative in our state, and I'm proud of the fact that we actually have an initiative process, that we should be able to run it and vote it.
Ranked choice voting is not a good idea for Idaho. If you've seen these brochures, there's some over here, and take one for yourself, take one for a friend, and make sure they understand that this will change the two-party system here, and it will not be a good change, and we can take our cue from Alaska. Their motto now is, let's take out the trash, rid the rank. So grab a flyer, give it to your neighbors, your friends, and let's not have this happen in Idaho. Thank you.
So like everything the leftists push on us, it's a lie. You know, they call it open primary initiative. It's ranked choice voting. They don't want to say that. They go up to people and get them to sign a petition. And these poor people that don't really understand what it's going to do to the election process in the state, they sign a petition, and then if they get enough signatures, now we have to deal with this. I'm not a fan of the initiative process. I grew up in a state where they let initiatives have a lot of influence in the state, California. It ruined the state. The initiative process is a bad process, and it should not be, we should not allow it to have the influence that it does. Because what happens when they run these initiatives, what do? They throw a ton of money at it, and they buy it. They're not getting people to buy into it, they buy these people. And we should fight it with everything we can.
I'm against it.
I'm against it ultimately because if you all don't like any of the candidates up here, it would remove your ability to sign up for the general election in November to say, I don't like these guys, I want to be on the ballot. And it would take away your right to do that. As well, ranked choice voting, it needs to be one voter, one ballot, one count.
Thank you all. Thank you all. Last question. Do you support Idaho's law, the Vulnerable Child Protection Act, H0071, which the Supreme Court just allowed to go into effect, which prevents gender transition treatments for minors from being administered in Idaho? Start with Jane Sauter, 1 minute.
I would be against any legislation that would have anything to do with the mutilation, transgender, anything to do with children. Can you give me the second half of the question?
I just shut the mic off. We'll try. Okay, second half of the question.
Read the whole thing again.
All right. Do you support Idaho's law, the Vulnerable Child Protection Act, H0071, which the U.S. Supreme Court just allowed to go into effect, which prevents gender transition treatments for minors from being administered in Idaho.
Yes, I absolutely support that. Thank you.
So I covered this a little bit already. You know, doctors that want to mutilate people should go to another state. I don't need those people here. I think it's disgusting. When you have a kid, when you have somebody, you know, under the age of 18 that says, I want to cut one of my bits off, I mean, if they want to cut their arm off, are we going to let them cut their arm off? I mean, we're generally going to say, hey, you have a problem and you need to seek some mental help. But when they say they want to cut their reproductive bits apart, and they get these doctors making, you guys know how much they make when they do one of these things? It's like $1 million per kid.
Yeah.
This is money driven, okay? They're pushing this stuff because there's so much money in it, like everything else. It always all comes down to money, right? So if we're not going to let a kid decide to chop his arm off, why on earth would we let a kid decide to mutilate themselves? And when these guys do the, we're just going to do the hormone blocking or the hormone therapy, no. That is permanently altering those kids. I don't care what they tell you, it is permanently altering them. It's permanently affecting their ability to grow sex organs and later reproduce in life. And most of them that have those drugs, they're going to be infertile for the rest of their life. There's nothing they can do about it. So I'm completely against this.
I would have supported that law, and all the other things that were said. I don't need to repeat them. But we need to quit giving our future to 5-4 decisions. We need to think that through very carefully. That we have 105 people in our legislature that we tasked with giving us statutes to live by. And then somebody said that the Supreme Court was supposed to have the review of that. And 5 to 4 can change your life. We've been doing that for far too long.
And yes, I'm against surgeries for transitioning children. I'm against medications that would chemically castrate children and change their lives. I think there should be more oversight for psychotropic medications given to children because once you start changing brain chemistry as children are developing, it's hard to really get it back to where it needs to be.
So I voted for House Bill 71 last year. 22 senators out of 35 voted in favor. It didn't pass the House by enough to override the governor's veto. It did not pass the Senate by enough to override the governor's veto, so I was glad that the governor did not override it because I wasn't sure what his position was going to be. This year we added to it. House Bill 668 prohibits the use of taxpayer funding for any transgender treatments for adults or anybody else. So that succeeded. The governor signed that into law. We also passed a bill this year that the governor signed into law that defines male and female, boys and girls, fathers and mothers, and I supported that. We also signed into law last year, and I co-sponsored Senate Bill 1100 to prevent transgender boys from using the girls' locker rooms at schools. Yay! And I supported that. So that's my position on these bills. I'll give you one more. We passed a bill this year, House Bill 538, that would prohibit a requirement at schools that I use a pronoun of somebody that's not commensurate with their biological sex. And I supported that bill as well.
I certainly agree we need to protect our children. I have not read House Bill 71 of 2023. I don't know the exact details. And I say that is important because the details in a bill matter, right? And so I'll never tell you I'll vote yes or no. You can support an idea, but you have to know the details before you vote on one. So the example of that is from a few years back when I voted no on a bill that would have prevented, that this bill was written to prevent transgender boys from playing in girls' sports. I told you at the beginning of this, I don't support that, but that bill had a lot of complications in it. We were being told it had problems. That bill, I checked today. I voted no, but it passed, and you would say it passed into law, but it hasn't not been implemented 3 years later because it's still in the court systems because we didn't get it right the first time. Go back, if there's a problem with the bill, get it right the first time. It's a very iterative process, the legislative lawmaking is, and we don't have to pass it the first time. We don't have to pass it to find out what's in it, like Nancy Pelosi says.
I voted against the bill in question last year, voted against it again this year. Excuse me, for those bills to protect our kids. And my rationale was do the research. Conventional wisdom is a lot of these kids ultimately have a period in their life where they're in transition and then go back to their biological, what they started with. So I think it's important to tap the brakes sometimes and be careful on what we do with our youth, just like any other decision. So I supported it. I don't support trying to have bills run that are already in court for an earlier version. I think we have to be really careful about that, about tying our state up in the legal system. But in this case, with the trans stuff, it made good sense to tap the brakes and slow things down for our kids. Thank you.
Closing remarks.
Well, everybody ready? We're up to closing remarks. Ooh. Closing remarks. Well, maybe. There we go. All right. So, we started with you, did we not?
Started with me.
Started with you. Okay. Have at it. We'll go back to the front. Go ahead. Show us how it's done, Scott.
2 minutes.
Okay, let me tell you how I view the Idaho Senate. Actually, some of the decisions are not difficult. When you have a bill in front of you that is going to protect children from the transgender hysteria and insanity, your principle is either there or it's not. The bills, they're not like the United States Congress. They're 1 to 20 pages max. Most of them are a couple of pages. I would automatically vote to protect children every time and not impose boys on girls and vice versa. I would automatically vote to uphold gun rights on every key Second Amendment question. Republicans, most of them in the room, understand there are certain bills that you're going to vote a certain way, and guess what? When you don't get something exactly right, which often happens in the legislature, often happens, and guess what? We come back and we fix it next year, or we run a trailer bill behind it. That's how it actually works. And when you talk about the power of the courts, in Idaho, the courts totally give deference to the Idaho legislature and what our will was. That's the way the federal courts are designed. That's not the way they've been working. And if you haven't noticed, there is a very big push to grow welfare in Idaho. We have grown our government 54% in the last 5 years. Cost of government. Major welfare expansion. Total drift to the left. Total onslaught on the traditional family. Total onslaught on children. No real school choice if public school isn't working for children. There are a lot of issues. And you want someone there who understands what the cultural war is and how to appropriately respond with the sovereignty of the state legislature and the sovereignty of the people represented at the state legislature. That's what I've done for 2 years. That's why I'm rated as one of the most conservative legislators in Idaho. I hope you guys will help keep me there so that we can fight for Idaho and fight for real freedom and fight for traditional values. So I welcome your vote on May 21st. Thank you.
Well, he's certainly right. We can go back and write another bill next year, just like our abortion law, and we can do it while women are dying. We can just not get it right the first time and just practice on people. Is that what we're saying? So I'll cover another narrative we've heard about our budget growing, this incredible budget growth in the state of Idaho. In the last 4 years, 10% population growth, 19% inflation. So that doesn't meet up to the 50% growth that we're talking about. But what counts as government spending in the state of Idaho? Do you remember you got a tax rebate 3 times? In 2021 and in 2022 and again in 2022. Those were tax rebates. That was a check that was cut from Boise. That $1.02 billion counts as spending. Does that count as spending to you? In that same time frame, we put money in the bank, rainy day savings, to get us back to the pre-2008 levels. So we, as conservative Idaho legislators, we put that money back in. Does that count as spending? Yes, it does, because that is money that is appropriated by the legislature and shifted from the checking account to the savings account. We paid off debt early. Does that count as spending? It certainly does. We had transportation bonds from the 90s. We paid those off early, saved millions in taxpayer money on the interest on those, counts as spending. So when we talk about the spending being up 50%, you might agree with some of that spending. That's your money coming back to you. That's the paying off debt and putting money in the bank. So that's a narrative that can be said with a graph that shows 4 years and the total amount appropriated by the Idaho State Legislature, but let's define what spending is.
I've served all of you for the last 2 years. I voted as a conservative Republican. I followed essentially our party platform. I've not followed the platform in a couple of different issues. I feel that it's really important for local control. I believe that it's really important for all of our healthcare system to work. I also supported education. There's been people that have questioned that. I don't. I think it's an investment in our communities. So I have voted on all the social issues, and essentially I follow along with all of our family values and our family practices. I go along with all of that. But I also bring that I've voted for all of you and I brought bills for you. I've brought from start to finish 3 bills for Boundary County: water adjudication, the grizzly bear and game depredation for your 4-H people, and a public works bill to help our county do some construction work. So I know what it takes to get a bill from start to finish, and one to actually help our own local community, and not to do something that may be something that you hear about in the news, but actually get it done. So I'm asking for your vote. I'd like to follow through. I have a couple other issues that I want to follow for our communities again. We need to fix our EMS system, and we need to do some work for our fire districts. I know I'm uniquely qualified to do that, and I can promise you I'll follow through with it. Already started a lot of work on it, and I will continue to do that. You have my promise for that. Thank you.
I'm going to be vulnerable with you tonight and give you a snippet of who I really am. So I have a story for you. In 1996, we were expecting our 5th child. Everything was normal and we were preparing for another home birth. The labor and delivery turned out to be very different, and our little 6-pound baby girl was born breech. And though she was still attached to me and getting oxygen, she was lying perfectly still and not breathing. I began to lift her little arms and her little legs, and I prayed to God, Lord, you didn't bring her this far to let her die. Please put your breath in her. At that moment, God spoke to my husband to pick her up and to turn her upside down and spank her bottom, just like in the movies. So that's what he did. And she let out a little gasp and then a big old yelp. God heard our cry and he gave her life. Similarly, our nation is in distress. God didn't bring us 250 years into this great American experience to leave us. I hope you will join me in praying for our country with that same passion and desperation that we had when we cried out to God for our daughter. In closing, there are 4 reasons why you should vote for me. I will be a Republican who follows the Republican platform. I will join the Idaho Freedom Caucus and cooperate with other liberty-loving legislators. I will not waver or be influenced by left-leaning legislators or lobbyists. I will effectively represent you and your family. I ask for your vote on May 21st in the primary. To learn more about my positions, please visit janesauterforidaho.com.
So we've got just a few things that I need to do, or I have a few things that I need to do, or that I want to do. I want the government to be smaller. I want you to pay less taxes. I want you to have more freedom. then I want you to have more liberty. I want the government out of your lives as much as possible, and I want you to keep as much of your money as possible. We had, last time around, we had the grocery tax. Everybody, how many times have we heard the grocery tax thing? A million times, right? We all heard it a million times. Have they ever told you what departments they're going to cut? Of the 100 and I think it's 190 now departments that the state has, have they ever told you who they're going to cut when they cut a tax? They don't tell you that because they're not cutting anything. They're just shifting the tax around. You know, they don't cut the taxes, they just move them. You know, a lot of times they move them to property owners. So what I want to do is actually cut some stuff. I want to actually remove some departments from the government. We don't need all of the government agencies that we have. Do you think we need 190 agencies in the government? I don't think we do. And I think that we should start taking the low-hanging fruit and start picking them off and actually getting rid of some employees and saving us all some money. Don't you guys think that would be a good idea? Wouldn't you like to have a smaller government? Wouldn't you like to be paying fewer people down in Boise $100,000 a year to tell you how to live your life and tell you what to do? I would, and I think the rest of you would too. And I think that's why you should vote for me in this primary so I can go be your representative and try and do those things. And I want you to know that everything that happens down there, you're gonna find out about, because I'm not hiding anything from anybody. I'm a completely open book. You can ask me any question. I'm not going to come back to you in 2 years and say, you know, I stood with the Republican platform 51% of the time. That's not going to happen. I'm going to come back and I'm going to say, I stood with the Republican platform hopefully 100% of the time, or at least as high a number as possible that makes sense. I mean, nobody's perfect, but let's shoot for it. And, you know, we'll explain our failures later. Thank you very much, Spencer Hutchings. Please come see me in the back if you have any questions.
So originally, when the founders gave us this form of government, a complex republic, their ideas were that it would only work if the people that were in that government were public servants. So what I want to do is to go to Boise, and at least for me, I want to put the word servant back into the vocabulary. We were designed, or the legislature is designed to serve you. It's designed to protect your life, your liberty, and your property. And much of all the other stuff it needs to leave it alone so that you can live a quiet and peaceable life and basically live your own life as you see fit. One of the things that I would like to do also that's just a kind of a mechanical thing is for every piece of legislation that is passed, I'm going to look for a bad one that needs to be repealed. I think I'm just going to make it kind of a hobby horse. I suspect there's some, don't you? Maybe 1 or 2,000. I would be glad to go down there and represent you, to be your public servant. You can look me up on cornellforidaho.com, and I'll answer the phone and I'll get back to you. Thanks for everyone being here tonight. This was a really good representation of Boundary County, and I like to see that. I like to see the engagement. And I'm glad that you can ask us these hard questions and expect good answers. And whatever we said tonight, think about it, vote accordingly. But your vote is between you and God. It's not between anybody else. It's a sacred service you're performing for your country. Do it with that in your conscience.
We have a government that we can participate in so many levels. Whether it's participating in your school board to be on a curriculum selection committee, you've got the opportunity to do that. I'm here to serve you, and I've got the record to prove that I've been a servant leader. I've served in our nation's wars in the most arduous places. One summer I saw 132 degrees, and I was in a tent with air conditioning that couldn't keep up. I've been in the hard places, and I've done the hard things. But what I will tell you this is I'm for a limited government. But do you know what it takes to arrest a person, to adjudicate that, and then to send them to jail? Do you know how many people it takes to do that? There's at least 50 different persons involved in that process. If we're going to ask our government to do something, we need to make sure that it has the resources to do it well. And when we look at fentanyl and the crisis that we're facing with that coming north, We need to make sure that we have the right people in place to do that. We need to make sure that we're not paying our police officers $19 an hour, $2 or more than they would make at McDonald's, to do a job that is extremely more dangerous, more trying, and if you look at their personal lives, they have the highest divorce rate amongst our professions. Now, I'm for cutting taxes where appropriate. I'm for cutting programs where appropriate. But those things that we're asking our government to do, we need to make sure that it has the resources to do it and to do it well. I have the proven servant leadership to listen to all sides of the argument, to bring people together to find a common solution, and I'm here to work for you, the voter. Thank you.
I'd like to thank all of the candidates for coming tonight. I know it was a long haul. I really appreciate you all coming and answering those hard questions. I'd like to thank the audience as well for coming and for hanging out this long. We felt that it was more important to ask the questions than to cut everybody short. So I hope that your butts aren't too sore. Thank you all for coming.
Go Badgers!